I still haven't gotten the hang of remembering that I need to make some sort of thumbnail for the YouTube video, and I'm going to have to make 360 more of them. But this is the video log for February 22nd, and it snowed today. Now, I should say I'm a native. I'm a native of the greater Seattle area in the Pacific Northwest. I was born in West Seattle specifically. But when I was 3 years old, my father, who was an airline pilot at the time, moved the family to Minnesota, the Minneapolis area, because he was flying for Northwest Airlines. And at the time, he had to commute. Not a lot of people know this, but airline pilots typically commute by way of flying on an airplane for many hours to get to a hub airport, where they then are assigned the aircraft that they'll be piloting for their trips, go out, do their trips, return to the hub, get on another plane or take the same plane on another trip. And then when they're done with their block of flights, that usually takes between 2 to 7 days or more, depending on the airline, then they go home. So my dad was essentially, when he was living here, commuting between 3 and 3.5 hours just on the plane itself, not counting driving to the airport and waiting around for the plane to take off. So lot of commute time. You think your commute's bad? Try commuting for about 4 hours. That's rough. So we moved to Minnesota so he wouldn't have to do that. He was also closer to his parents, who lived in Iowa, and when I was growing up, we would get driven down to Sioux City, Iowa, which is a pretty stinky place. Maybe I'll talk about Sioux City another time. It's pretty cool, but it's definitely like the quintessential Midwest small town. It's I'm not going to talk too much about Sioux City, but I grew up in Minnesota because my dad flew for Northwest, and Northwest's major hub was the Minneapolis airport. And then when I was about 11 years old, Dad said, "I've had enough," and we moved back to the Seattle area. And I've been here since 1992. So I really am a native of Seattle, but I'm also someone that grew up in a place where we get lots of snow. And by comparison, Seattle gets very little snow. And in fact, we got very little snow last night. We got maybe an inch, probably not even a full inch. Just enough to sort of dust everything, and it made the commute this morning very pretty. And thankfully, there wasn't a lot of snow on the road. There was quite a bit of ice, and I drive very carefully, but a lot of people decided to take the day off, which was nice. So I didn't have to worry about accidents or accidentally smacking into somebody. The commute home tonight was also very light. There wasn't a lot of people out there, so that's good. But it is nice. I did a lot of things that a lot of people in America probably never did growing up these days. I sledded between middle of November usually at least, all the way until March sometimes. And one year we had snow on the ground on May 1st. When I was in elementary, we would come home from school. We would grab sleds, toboggans. This was a time where the big round sleds were really popular, which were basically, you couldn't aim where they were going. You sat on it and then you'd start spinning on the way down, and gravity had full effect and you couldn't steer it or do anything. I didn't have one of those. I had a more traditional toboggan that was just sort of a rectangle made out of plastic that you sat in, and you could lean it and sort of aim it. And so there were two backyards. We called it the West Hill because the lower house was the house of the West family. And they graciously let all the kids in the neighborhood use their yard in the winter to go sledding. So we would climb to the top of West Hill, and we would climb to the top of that hill, and then there was another backyard behind them. I don't know how gracious those folks were, but we still climbed up to the top of their yard. And then the goal was, there was a tiny gap. It was the size of a door in a fence. That was basically what it was. It was a gap between this fence and this really thick wooded area so thick with trees that if you sled into it, you would just stop. So the goal was slide from the top of the one backyard, aim for this narrow little, it could have been more than 5 feet wide gap, so you could get into the West Hill, and then slide all the way down. And if you were really good, you'd make it all the way to the street, which drove our parents crazy. They hated that. You would not hear, a year wouldn't go by where you wouldn't hear a story on the news about some kid sledding that hit the street and a car smacked into him. I think that was probably the same story getting told multiple times just to try and scare us kids. And we didn't make it to the street very often, so we weren't in a lot of danger. One thing that was sort of more dangerous was a lot of snowfalls in Minnesota. When I was a kid, the yearly average temperature was apparently 7 degrees Fahrenheit for anyone internationally watching, which is well below freezing. And like I said, it would snow all the way from November up through March sometimes into April, although March was usually when you started to see a thaw. So you've got November, December, January, February, March. You've got 4 solid months of snow, sometimes more. So there was a lot of snow falling, and to move this snow, they would use road graders, which are these big pieces of construction equipment. You've probably seen one and you didn't know what it was called. They tend to have 2 wheels at the front and then 4 wheels at the back, and this long sort of bar between them. And then on that bar is at a perpendicular angle is a blade, like a bulldozer blade or front. And what it's supposed to do is, while the tarmac or the cement of the street is still moist, it runs the length of the street and creates just a little bit of a grade going to either side of the street, so that water, when it rains or when snow melts, goes off to the side, goes into the gutters, and is collected into the sewer system of the municipality. So that's what they used to plow streets, because it could cover most of the street in one go. And when these things came through to plow the snow, they left banks of snow at the edges of yards and on sidewalks 6 feet tall. That was what winter in Minnesota was like back when I was a kid in the 80s. So of course we're kids. Of course we come home from school each day. We have very little time before the sun goes down, but we were prodigious. We were hardworking. We built snow forts, and we would build them by hollowing out the sides of these snow banks that were 6 feet tall, because we only got up to 3 or 4 or 5 feet depending on how old we were, and so we would make snow forts doing that. And that scared the crap out of our parents even more than sledding into the street, which, as I pointed out, was very hard, because something that's very popular in Minnesota, or at least was, probably still is snowmobiling. And to anybody with a snowmobile, these huge 6 foot tall snowbanks on the sides of the streets look an awful lot like snowmobile tracks. So our parents were afraid that we were going to try and hollow out one of these banks to make a snow fort, and then some teenager or young adult punk with a snowmobile would go whizzing past, collapse the whole thing on all of us, and kill everybody almost instantly. And if not instantly, we would be buried under snow and slowly suffocate to death. This never happened, at least not to any of us. We would get dismayed because we would come home at 3 in the afternoon when it was just starting to get dark, because mom and dad wanted you to be home before it got dark. And then that was when the teenagers with snowmobiles would head out and just demolish everything that we had built. We would come home from school the next day, or if it was the weekend, we'd get up the next morning. All of our hard work is stomped under snowmobile tracks. So that's my memory of snow. I don't know what it's like these days. I don't know if global warming has made the winters in Minnesota shorter or at least more mild. I don't know if they still use road graders to plow streets. But there are times, living in the state that is known for its rainfall, when I sort of miss it. But all it takes is one snowstorm to halt traffic and turn a 15-minute commute into an hour and a half for me to say, I like the rain just fine. I'm Eric Spornitz, this was my vlog, and tomorrow will be better.